maybe this is also going to be a controversial statement to make, but
we love controversy around here.
I believe that life is constantly presenting us with exactly what we need to learn the lessons that we're needing to learn in that moment.
Life has to win every day. Death only has to win once. So you want to be really alert to any possibility of death.
Immediately after the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, researchers from UC Irvine, they studied two groups. Now, the first group, these were people who binged watched news about the bombing. The second group, these were people who were actually at the Boston Marathon. And the researchers found that the people who watched the news, they had higher rates of PTSD and they had higher rates of trauma compared to the people who were actually at the bombing. That is insane. Welcome to 2%. I'm your host, Michael Easter. So if you turn on cable news or open your news feed right now, you will be hit with a sea of negativity. There is global conflict, there is economic instability, there is craziness coming out of Washington as always. And all of this negativity, it can often lead us to think that the world is terrible and focus on the negatives, not to mention when things go wrong in our day-to-day lives, we tend to really hone in on those things, even when things are overall pretty good. Turns out, there's a good reason for this. Our minds are literally built to work against us and over-focus on the negatives. So today we have two guests who are going to give us some solutions for how to bias yourself to a little more positivity and feel a little better in day-to-day. First, we're going to bring on the meditation teacher, Cara Lai. She's going to tell us why acceptance is so important. And then we're going to bring on Roy Baumeister. He is a psychologist who will talk to us about our negativity bias and how we can start to bias our minds more towards the positive. Great episode. You'll feel better after listening to it. So let's dive in. If you have been watching the news at all lately, you might feel like I do, which is that the world is completely falling apart. And that can be a little bit anxiety-inducing. But I recently read a Substack post by Cara Lai, and she is our guest today. Cara is a meditation teacher. She has been meditating for many, many years. And she really provided in this post a new way to think about all the chaos that arises in our world. And it starts in the mind and reframing your relationship to it. Now, I love Cara because she is not your typical woo-woo meditation teacher. She's a little bit insane. And I love that about her. So she spent a year in the woods in Colorado meditating. She is also a former barefoot runner. And I don't mean she had thin shoes. I mean, this lady would actually run miles and miles with no shoes at all in January in New England. She also worked on a really hilarious, amazing Comedy Central series that we're going to talk about with the most hilariously named character ever. So let's get into Cara. Cara Lai, thanks for coming on 2%.
Thanks for having me. Hi.
So I want to start with the fact that there is so much wild, horrifying shit happening right now. Wars in the Middle East, political polarization, insert 100 other things. And you recently wrote on Substack. And this made me start to think about these things differently and how I process them, because I find myself when something happens, I'm in my newsfeed, I'm judging, I'm addicted to the Twitter drip of information coming out about this. You wrote, "What if what's happening right now is exactly what should be happening? The mind still constantly thinks it knows what's good and is bad and continues to be at odds with reality nearly all the time." And that same post, it had the subtitle, which I just loved. It was, "The universe does not care about your opinion." So why'd you write that post? And how do we understand what you were trying to get to in that post?
I wrote that post because I am often finding myself using the question, what if what's happening is exactly what's supposed to be happening? I use that phrase a lot in my guided meditations, and I hadn't really given much thought to why I use that phrase so much or where that even came from until some of my students called me out on it because I think they were triggered by it.
What did they say? What was the call out like?
It was a group of students who meets separately on their own in their own little meditation group. And they apparently had just had a bunch of discussion about this phrase that I use. And some people thought that it felt like I was suggesting that there's some kind of predestiny at play or some kind of divine being. And Yeah, I think there was a question about the Buddhist origins of that, if there are any, because I'm supposedly a Dharma teacher.
Yeah.
And I'm using this phrase often in my guided meditations. And they're like, did the Buddha say that? Why are you saying that?
Yeah.
And, we always like to point to some voice of authority. And if I'm using that so much, then yeah, where'd you get that?
Where did you get it?
Well, I hadn't thought about it until they asked me. And upon thinking about it, I think I realized that it just came to me when I was meditating on a lot of long retreats, and at some of my darkest moments of suffering, and also at some of my most blissed out, peaceful moments.
Yeah.
That question felt relevant, and it felt like what it did, the impact that question had for me was to immediately expose any resistance that I was having to the present moment. Mm-hmm. And that's why I find it really useful, because we might not realize that we're resisting what's happening, because we could say, this is what's happening, rather than this is supposed to be what's happening. We just say, this is what's happening. But we could say that in all different ways. You could see like, this is what's happening, or we could say, this is what's happening. Mm-hmm. Or, like you can just flavor it in many different ways.
Yeah.
But if one suggests that it's supposed to be what's happening, then you kind of see the resistant lens through which you may have been looking at it until that point. And
so is the pushback that you got from people that the things that are happening are, when we look at news, they're seemingly so terrible, and that what was there's a question in there. What was people's resistance to that? Because I could see the pushback to that being, yeah, but insert X event that is seemingly terrible.
Yes. I mean, that's the most obvious reason that it would trigger people. They didn't bring up specific examples, but I think it was just like, well, really? Look what's happening. How could we say that this is supposed to be happening? And in my post, I talked about just this way, way backed up perspective that we could take on things. And most of the time, we just have a really narrow perspective on things. And we really, when it comes right down to it, have no idea what's good and what's bad. It looks bad. People are dying. There's a lot of lack of control, and there's climate change, and there are wars and starvation, and all of these things that we could clearly say are unequivocally bad. But then when you look at the grand scheme of things, the example that I use in the Substack post is the bubonic plague. Like a third of Europe's population died as a result of the bubonic plague. But up until that point, the Catholic Church had such intense control over what people could think and whether or not they would be allowed to read certain books or believe in certain things, and whether or not they could decide whether or not someone was going to go to hell. And then they lost all this power as a result of the plague and all these people dying, and money trickled down to the middle class. The feudal system broke down, and the Renaissance started. And so then that was a really big shift that it took a big event like the bubonic plague to create. Now, all of that is arguable, but it just points to the fact that we really readily will label something based on our very tiny window into it, our little microcosmic momentary understanding of that event. And the question, introducing the question, is this something that maybe should be happening? It just makes us have to expand into more possibilities, more perspectives. There might be more at play here than I am taking into account.
Yeah. This idea that dominoes are falling, we can see the one that's falling now, but we have no idea where that path of dominoes leads in the future. And it could be could be somewhere good, potentially.
Yeah. And if we are having such a narrow view of this is good and this is bad, what's also happening is, since we're not accounting for all those other dominoes, we feel we have this feeling like we have the control over this. We are the ones who are somehow responsible for making this bad thing stop happening.
Right.
And, does that make sense?
Totally.
If we don't have the big perspective, which helps us understand that it's kind of out of our control, then it feels like it's in our control. And that feels really shitty and really intense.
And there's some things in daily life where maybe asking that question raises another question of, okay, well, what could I do that leads to action that makes positive change? But with a lot of things, it is totally out of our control. And the more we think we can try and wrestle control from that, probably the more we suffer in the moment.
Yeah. And oddly enough, if we don't feel like we're in control of the whole situation, we suddenly step into our true sense of agency around what's happening, because we stop feeling overwhelmed by helplessness and we start being available to see what actually could be done about this. And it's often something a lot simpler and more accessible than what we've been thinking. We've been trying to tackle the entire problem of war single-handedly, or climate change by all of the, I'm just going to stop driving cars and I'm going to turn off all the lights in my house, or I'm just going to give all of my money to the World Central Kitchen and that'll fix the problem somehow. But that's not actually going to do it. That's not going to fix the problem. But we could be just a presence of calm for the people in the room that we're in. And that actually does have an immediate impact on the situation. And it turns out that most of the problems in the world are the result. Well, okay, I shouldn't make that big of a blanket statement, but many of the problems that we are freaked out about in the world are the result of whatever the opposite of peace is in our hearts, like stress in the human heart, greed, aversion, feeling like there's not enough. And all of that stress is driving a lot of behavior that's harmful.
Yeah.
So if we are able to change what's going on in our own hearts, that has a major ripple effect and a direct impact on the problem, because it gets right at the root of the problem.
Well, I can tell you this works because your own calmness is already making me feel calmer.
Do I seem calm to you? Because I drank so much caffeine this morning.
Well, you do seem calm. You seem calmly caffeinated, not in the sense of calm like a sedative, but peaceful yet caffeinated, which I think is
that's what I'm going for. I like that. That's
to take this to a micro level. How do you use it? We're talking about these bigger concepts now, things like wars, climate change. How have you found yourself using this idea in your day-to-day life, and also with some of the people that you work with? How are they using it?
Well, okay. So I guess I find myself dropping that question in at moments when I've recognized that I believe the opposite is true.
Yeah.
Which, happens not infrequently in my day-to-day life. Things seem to be going just fine, and then all of a sudden my toddler has a meltdown at the supermarket when I'm carrying a crying baby and a bunch of people are waiting in line behind me, and then he's pulling stuff off the shelves and making a mess, and it seems inescapable. What if what's happening right now is exactly what's supposed to be happening? There's just an immediate sense that it's not an emergency that I have to change. And then I can pause. So it just allows me to slow down and reconsider the situation. And there's so much more space for that than we realize. We make so many situations into emergencies that really aren't emergencies.
Catastrophizing.
Right. I mean, it's actually really not a catastrophe, the situation that I just described. And neither are so many of the situations that we get so bent out of shape about. And when I introduce that question, it just brings this immediate sense of relief. Like, oh, okay, this doesn't have to be my problem. What if it's not a problem at all? What if this isn't even about me at all? Because it might be easy for me to jump to the conclusion that like the universe is testing me. They're testing my ability to be peaceful in this like intense situation. But that actually was an idea about what was happening that was also bringing me stress. Like, oh, I have to like do a really good job of not getting stressed out right now. And this really stressed. No.
Am I going to rise to the occasion that life has presented with me? It's this like binary win or loss type thing.
Right. Yeah. And it just helps me see that was another way that I was making it harder for myself. And so, yeah, that question is just, I find it very helpful. And my students, I've been talking with my students just over the past couple of days about this because I just put that post out. And a lot of people have said it's been really helpful for them too, for the same reason. It just immediately brings this sense of relief. Someone did say that only recently did it start being helpful, but it wasn't for a while because she has a kid who has a disorder that's really like a mental health issue, actually, that's really, really painful for him. And for her to bring that statement in or that question in, it kind of suggested to her that he should be suffering in that way. Like he's supposed to somehow be suffering. And that was really, really not okay with her.
Yeah.
But what started to turn it for her was that, first of all, it was what should be happening was that she should be hating what's happening, because that's part of what's happening too, is your reaction is also a thing. So that the suggestion of should this be happening or not is also an invitation for your reactions and your strong emotions and your difficult emotions to be part of that. Like all of this, including your resistance to it. What if that's also supposed to be happening? And so there's some space kind of grew around this situation for her. And eventually there was a real turning point for her where she felt like she could really drop a shitload of resistance that she was having to her son having this real mental health challenge. And then that led to a really, really loving, connected moment between the two of them that they hadn't been able to have.
That's great.
Yeah, so it's like the resistance to these what we have decided are problems can fall away, and then we can really open our hearts to them.
This kind of reminds me of, I've been sober for about 10 years, and I know a lot of sober people. And I have a friend who, I think at one point he was living on the streets. And he said, I never thought the worst thing that ever happened to me would become the best thing. Because he had to go through this, he had this period that was just absolute hell. But it gave him these insights that in retrospect, he started taking action. And his life became better than it ever would have been had he not gone through that hell. And it's like he had to kind of go to the bottom to see what it was like down there. And he learned something down there and then started doing things that improve things. And so I think if you would have asked him, 24 hours before he decided to get sober, he would have been like, this is the end. I'm never coming back from this. But it was in that time and that, the action it took, it totally changed his perspective about that moment in his life.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing is a theme in spiritual practice, that the hardest moments become the most important transformative moments. And I myself can definitely reflect on. We talked about that year-long retreat that I did in a previous recording, and that was maybe the hardest thing that I've ever been through, and also maybe the biggest transformative experience that I ever went through. And a difference, I think, between me and your friend, it's I didn't come out on the other side of that because I was like, well, I got to turn my life around and make different choices. That just wasn't what happened. It just kind of like slowly, the Lyme disease that I was going through, it slowly started to heal itself, and that happened. But I think just being in this state of confusion and continuously being willing to show up for myself had a huge impact, where all this patience grew and all this understanding and compassion grew for human suffering.
So for context for listeners, was it in 2020 or 2021?
Yeah.
You went on a year-long retreat and you were alone.
Yeah.
And it was basically a year-long meditation retreat. And were you in a cabin or?
Yeah, I was in a cabin at a meditation retreat center in Colorado called Tara Mandala. And they had these little individual cabins where they were set up, because that tradition, that Tibetan Buddhist tradition, has a feature of really long retreats. Sometimes, I think 3 years is the traditional length. 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days. I just did just 1 year.
Just one. Yeah, you really cut it short there. What were some of the swings you went through on that? Like, what were the lows? What were the highs? Did you ever have times where you were like, all right, I got to get the hell out of here immediately? But obviously you didn't. So what was going through that like?
Yeah, well, I was excited going into the retreat because it was something that I had wanted to do for a really long time. And it felt like the perfect time to do it because it was a pandemic and there was not much going on, not much FOMO to have.
Yeah.
And I was excited because I had only really had positive retreat experiences, and I had done a lot of retreat leading up to that. And my mind had really understood how to meditate and how to get into these really deep, blissful even states of concentration. And when I got on the retreat, it felt impossible to concentrate for the first time in my life.
Why do you think that was?
Well, I had just recently found out that I had chronic Lyme disease for like 5 years or something. And it was somehow coming to a head right as I was entering the retreat. And I was in a lot of pain and a lot of mental fog. And evidently the mental fog was enough and the pain was enough that for the first time, I just couldn't, my mind just wouldn't focus. No matter what I tried, and I tried everything, it just couldn't land in my experience. And I felt like I was pretty good at meditating at that point. And so it felt like nothing worked. And I just remember breaking down and crying over and over again. There was like months where I was crying every day because I felt so helpless and there was just nothing to do. It felt like I was just steeping in my helplessness. And so that was a low, but it also felt really cathartic. It felt like there was this helpless place in me that had needed to cry for a really long time. And I had been on this ever since I discovered meditation. It was like, oh my God, I finally found the thing that's going to help me feel better in life. And like I have a direction and I know what to do if I'm suffering. It's this.
Yeah. And so then you sort of take it almost to the edge of, I'm going to do this for a year because if what I have been doing has led to this, the year will be almost this next level. And then you get there and you find that is like, oh, this is not what I planned for.
Yeah, it was like deeply, deeply disappointing. And it also, what I didn't realize is that at the time, I didn't realize that it was actually just expanding my perspective on what practice was. And it was helping me see that I didn't have to be so in control and in charge of my destiny and how good I was and how much I freed my mind, that I could really surrender, and I had to surrender to where the path was taking me. And it was taking me to some dark places that I didn't understand. And I had learnings, and I just got lessons that I didn't expect to get, but that I really needed. I really, really needed that kind of surrender.
What was your biggest insights from those?
You know, I had been used to having a certain flavor of insight up until I went on that retreat. And the flavor was just deep release and bliss.
Yeah.
But it
all
turned
good
out
all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And insight does feel good, but it doesn't always have to feel that blissful kind of release. And it didn't this time. It felt like a lot of compassion and recognition that it's just hard to be alive. And somehow naming that was a really big relief, because I don't think I realized that I was at odds with that. Like it doesn't have to be so hard to be alive. But maybe it just is. It just is hard to be alive. And the difficult things in life don't necessarily go away the more you work with your mind around them. We just get more open to all of the feelings we have around them. And so I think I'm just much more open now than I was before. And when something bad happens, I feel it more intensely, but then it's done. You know, it doesn't like get stuck in me the way it used to.
Are you better able to navigate it through actions, or is it totally just your sort of, I guess, mindset around it has shifted what it's going to mean to you moving forward?
I definitely feel way more available to act than I did before, because when something is blocked up in you, you don't have that much energy available to do something about it. When your mind is like really resisting something or still having unprocessed emotions about it, a lot of your energy is going towards dealing with that in your body, and there's tension there. But when things move through you more readily, you're just more consistently available to do what's needed to be done. And your mind is clearer and more able to see what is needed to be done.
Yeah. And you had to kind of go into the depths of the hardship in order to see that. I'll tell you about my own experience with meditation. So after I got sober, I started meditating like 20 minutes a day for maybe 4 or 5 years. I think it was good. Definitely helped me. Then I ended up going to the Arctic for more than a month. And for whatever reason, it's like the highest highs I'd experienced in meditation, it was like well beyond that. But it was also, it came with these hardships and insights. And it's like when I got home, I feel like that experience had shifted my relationship to all these things in my life that I think would have been challenging before that. It was just kind of a reframing of what am I going to consider a problem and how is this impacting me? So, for example, if some, hassle came up in my life before, it would be like, oh, this is a disaster. This is what am I, and I would just ruminate on that. And after that experience, it's like I could come home and that same thing might happen. I'd be like, you got a roof over your head. It's not minus 40 out. You got clean running water. This is great. You'll probably survive it. So do you feel like there are, like, what things can people do to get there? Because I think on one hand, your experience with meditation taught you that. On mine, my experience too almost gave me a flavor of that. I would say it was probably somewhat different. But what do you think the takeaway is for the average person about what they can do?
I believe that, and maybe this is also going to be a controversial statement to make, but I
We love controversy around here. Let it fly.
Good. I believe that life is constantly presenting us with exactly what we need to learn the lessons that we're needing to learn in that moment. And so we don't have to go looking for trouble or looking for something that's gonna transform us, and we don't have to work so hard to figure out our problems. All we have to do is open to exactly what's here right in front of us that we're resisting, and bring it in as potentially something that's going to somehow transform us. We just have not given it a chance because we've been so busy deeming it wrong and bad and trying to keep it at bay. And so if for you, the thing that is the hardest is every time you read the news, you get activated, then that could be something that is transformative for you, to just, what's actually happening for me let me really feel deeply into this moment, whatever moment of reactivity you might be having. What is this about for me? Why is this so troubling for me? When I can get past my rage, because that's what the tricky thing that our minds do is we just try to blame the world. You shouldn't be acting that way. This shouldn't be happening.
Totally.
No, like shouldn't. And that is all just ways of deflecting the attention away from your own experience. What is happening for me when I'm having this reaction? Oh, there's fear. Oh, I'm afraid that my world, my life is somehow being threatened. Or maybe that's not it. Maybe it's that I feel guilty somehow for living in a place at a time and with an abundance that other people don't have. And that's not fair. And I don't know what to do about that other than to get mad at the situation and feel helpless. And so if we can touch into that sense of guilt or shame and just see, oh, well, actually, I didn't choose this life. And it's not going to help anyone for me to keep myself apart from what is keeping me feeling comfortable. It's not going to help somebody who doesn't have food if I don't eat today. Then we can really let in the abundance of our lives, drop the guilt, and then become more available to actually do something that would be helpful.
Yeah. I think that you mentioned fear, and I think that underlies so much of what we do. I'll give you an example. I have German short hair pointers. They're absolutely nuts dogs because they're bred for hunting. And so they're wired, they're moving around all the time, they get into trouble. And when we would have people come over, my dog would like jump on them. And it would frustrate me. And I would get mad and be like, God, damn it, Stockton, why can't you just chill out for a bit? And then when I spent time unpacking that, I was like, why do I get frustrated that this dog jumps on people? And once I started unpeeling those layers, I go, oh, because I think that person is going to judge me as this shitty dog owner. Like, this person doesn't have his life together. He has this dog that's insane. And so it came to me, and then what's under that? And it's like, oh, well, that's a fear of almost a social rejection. And I had this guy who helped me out a lot in life, and he said, and he'd worked with a lot of people who'd gone through sobriety and gotten sober. And he basically said, of all these people he's helped, and there's a lot of people, he said, at the end of the day, I found the common theme is that people want two things. They want to be loved, and they don't want to be alone. That's it at the bottom of it. And all these reactions we have, a lot of time it's a fear about losing that.
Yes. Yeah. I love getting to the bottom of things like that. Like what you did with your own mind around the dogs. Like that is so interesting and fun for me. What is really at the heart of this like reactivity? And there's almost always some real vulnerability there that actually is a very shared experience. And here we were thinking we were so alone and we felt so ashamed and separate. But when we really get underneath the layers of anger and fear and shame, what's at the bottom is just this shared sense of wanting to be connected, wanting to be loved, and feeling vulnerable in our human experience. And like that, when the more you see it, the easier it becomes to look into your own experience and to look into your own reactivity, because it usually ends well.
Yeah. Well, it's like for me, it allowed me to go, you're not actually frustrated with the dog. And being frustrated with the dog is not really going to do anything to fix this underlying thing. And I would have to go, what do I care if the dog jumps on the mailman a little bit? Like, do I really care if the mailman rejects me? I'm like, no, I love the dog. Like, okay, we're going to try and work on the training a bit, but like, it's going to be fine. Like the mailman doesn't really care. I'm spinning up these narratives that like the mailman is going, this person does not have their life together. What is wrong with them? And that's not, maybe he's doing that, but like one, who cares? Two, he's probably not, And so it's like the unpacking of whatever
people
I'm
are
telling
only
myself.
really thinking about themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
And also what you're describing is so familiar as a parent, because that's what parents do when their kid is behaving a certain way. It's like, oh, you are a reflection of me. And if you don't stop doing that, I'm going to look so bad. And then we treat our kids in a way that is really unfair because they're kids and they're actually not extensions of us. They're their own person.
Totally. I want to talk about how you ended up on this path, I guess I'll call it, that you're on. I want to start, though, with Assy McGee. Tell us about the great American Mr. Assy McGee.
Well, okay, so I went to RISD for undergrad, Rhode Island School of Design, and I had the idea that I was going to be an illustrator. And so I started, my first job was as a storyboard artist for this cartoon that was on Adult Swim called Assy McGee, which was, I'm sure, just a bunch of stoner guys sitting around laughing and coming up with dumb ideas for cartoons. And this one actually took off. And the main character was a butt.
With legs, right?
He was a butt, yeah.
He was a talking butt.
He was a talking butt and a walking butt. So it was a human from the waist down. And he was a detective, and he was just really trigger happy. So he would just come in and shoot everything, and somehow he would have shot only the bad guys and have solved the crime in this brutish way. And I was in this climate-controlled office, and we were all just sitting at computers all the time, and I felt like I really didn't like it. And so eventually I was just like, I'm just going to do what feels good. I'm just going to quit this job and do what feels good in my body and what feels fun to me. And that ended up being working at a bunch of different outdoor jobs with kids. So I went and worked at summer camps and outdoor education programs. And of course, there's all kinds of hippie people there. And one of the hippie people was like, you should meditate. You would love it. And I did. And so I was like, this feels good. This is the thing that feels good. I will keep doing this.
How did you start?
He gave me a book that was called 8-Minute Meditation. And I meditated for 8 minutes every day.
Cool.
And that was all. And I just had, I don't know what it was, but it had a very quick impact on me where I started to have basically trippy experiences of being really moved by beautiful things like a sunset, and also feeling suddenly not as caught in my social anxiety as I had been up until that point. It was like I could watch myself being anxious instead of being lost in it and feeling so stuck in it. And so it felt like there was some kind of perspective that was starting to unfold, even though I really had no idea what I was doing. And I didn't even really connect those experiences with the meditation for a while, because I didn't really know that much about meditation and what it was supposed to do. I was just kind of doing it.
Yeah, that was actually what you said reminds me of one of the first times after I'd been meditating that I had an aha, this is working, is I've always hated speaking in front of groups. And I had to kind of give a talk thing. And I stood up there and I could feel my heart racing and my head going. And I just noticed it. And internally I laughed. I was just like, oh, yeah, this is what's happening. And then it led into this talk where I was just totally normal. And had I not done that and been able to almost detach, I don't know if that's the word, but it was just like have a perspective on it that like, this is hilarious. You're going to survive this. You're fine. And then immediately when I saw that, it just went, zoom, like my heart rate went from, 150 to like 60. It was crazy.
Yeah. The mic drop there, because meditation can have, it's powerful. It's really powerful. So I was having all these experiences, and then I just got on a roll with it because it felt like I was onto something. It felt like it was addressing all the problems that I felt like I had at the time.
And was this one, because I remember you were a big barefoot runner. And when I say barefoot, I don't mean you put on some like minimalist shoes. I mean like you had no shoes and you would go out and do these long runs. Was that during your outdoor stint? Before, after?
Yeah, the barefoot running started at the end of college. And I did a year of Assy McGee and barefoot running.
It's a good combo.
I know, it was the only thing that kept me sane. And then I went into these outdoor ed jobs. I did a lot of barefoot backpacking, and
were you in the Northeast?
Yes, yeah. So it was all weather conditions. I was also doing other extreme things, like one of the places where I worked had a lake, and it was in Maine, and I was jumping in the lake every day, and then I was continuing to jump in the lake every day, even into December, and it was awesome. Cool. But now polar plunging is really popular. At the time, it was like people thought I was insane.
Yeah, you're like an OG in that. Mm-hmm. People thought you were insane. Now they just think you listen to like some crazy health podcast that's telling you to do it.
Right. Yeah.
How did meditation change your relationship to the sort of, I'll call them extreme physical things you were doing, if at all?
It wore away at them over the course of time. I think I still, for years at the beginning of my meditation, loved doing those things and integrated them into my practice. And there are still aspects of that type of extreme physical experience that I really love and feel like they help me surrender. But there was a motivation behind me doing those things that was not helpful or friendly towards myself. There was this belief that I was not adequate, that I was and also there was a lot of fear that I had to somehow like build myself up to a point where I couldn't feel pain anymore or emotional vulnerability anymore. So basically it was a fear of vulnerability. And if I could just make myself invulnerable, then I wouldn't have to be with that fear. But through meditation, I could really see that was a driving force. And I could be with that fear and tend to that fear and acknowledge that I was never going to get away from it. I was never going to overcome it by doing enough miles of barefoot running. It was always going to be there. And it was like seeing and recognizing a small child that just was afraid, and that I had been kind of like punishing and forcing to do these really challenging things. And it was so tender to see that and be with her and finally give her what she was wanting and needing, which was just some company and like a hug. And so meditation really changed a lot of that behavior for me.
Do you think that those behaviors almost, I think you used the words healthy addictions in one of your Substack posts? It's like they become almost an escape and people get in this almost like compulsive addicted loop with them. But because it's running instead of drinking or eating a certain way instead of, cocaine or whatever the hell it is, like it becomes, I think it's totally fine. And it is, hey, probably beats smoking crack. At the same time, the underlying reason we're doing it, which is almost a form of escape, is the same. Is that
right?
Kind of what I was picking up in that post? I think you did.
Yeah, totally. And I could see too where meditation had become that for me. It was like, if I can just do enough meditation, then I'll, again, like I won't have to feel so vulnerable and so scared. And it's just the mind is a slippery thing, and it finds ways to keep these habits going. And one of the most appealing things about this spiritual path that I've found myself on is that it can help us recognize even that, everything, how the mind just wants to commandeer everything to try to fuel its unhealthy habits. And if there's a practice that helps me see that and undo that pattern, then that practice is for me. And that retreat was kind of what that was. It was like this forced surrender into helplessness. And because I didn't have I couldn't run, I couldn't even meditate. I just had to be with this raw human experience and not fight it anymore. And that was one of the most transformative things that ever happened to me. And it was also the hardest thing that ever happened to me, but maybe that's what was supposed to be happening.
There you go.
Do you like what I did there?
I like what you did there. We're like closing the circle, 40 minutes later. That was good.
Thanks. Yeah.
I do think, to your point, I mean, some of my own experiences have been that there's some breakthrough can happen in these like paths that almost feel like a breakdown. I remember I did this long hike for a book I have coming out, and the hike was definitely hard. It's like 45 days, but it was probably on day 33 where I just had this like insight. It was in like the Grand Canyon, and it was kind of like this understanding of why I was there and this release of like kind of, I feel like maybe since getting sober, I'd kind of tried to like, okay, your life was a complete train wreck for so long. And I'd almost overcorrected and tried to over-control things. And I just had this insight where it was like, it's okay. You're going to be okay. You can forgive yourself for all that shit. Just move on. And it was like, oh, but I don't think that would have happened had I not had all those miles and time outdoors of thinking. Like that just wouldn't have happened. It's almost like sometimes you have to get into these experiences that are really hard in the short term, but like if you can kind of stick with this, that like some sort of insight can arise.
Yeah. That I love that. And I think there's definitely something to be said about the healthy addictions for that reason.
Yeah.
Like it is, our mind just needs stepping stones, and it needs ways to transition away, not just suddenly be awake to everything, and we need these other meditative practices. And of course, like a meditation retreat where you go away and you separate yourself from everyone and you just meditate all the time is not a realistic way to live your life. I mean, I guess there are people who are monastics who do that, but not everybody could do that. And it's not sustainable. And so it's everything, I think, is a new experience to learn from. And we don't have to force ourselves to stop. And I never recommend forcing ourselves to stop some habit just because we think it's wrong or bad. I think the approach should be really gentle and just what's happening right now, like literally right now, not, okay, how do I change what's happening right now so that I can be with the moment better and feel better about what I'm doing? But let's open to what I'm doing now and why I might be doing it and what I might be feeling while I'm doing it. Because the quote unhealthy, or the quote healthy addiction is doing something to serve us.
Is that where the first place people can start is just asking that question? Like if someone wants to get into meditation?
I think it depends. Yeah, I think it depends on your style or what feels easier for you. I definitely recommend people start where it feels easiest. And if what feels easiest for you is not sitting still with your eyes closed, but just asking themselves what they're feeling right now, no matter what they might be doing, whether it's like doom scrolling on your phone or doing the dishes or driving, then perfect. Because that means you don't have to change. You don't have to like sit still and close your eyes, which for a lot of people can be really hard. Some people don't have as much difficulty with that or have a little less difficulty with it. So for those people, you could try sitting for a little while, like sit for 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 10 minutes. Just see what is a useful way for you to stay present. That's maybe the question that I can ask people is, what's going to help you stay present? Is setting aside designated time to meditate going to help you learn the habit of being present? Or is that not going to be so helpful? Maybe what's going to be helpful is picking something that you do regularly and just using that as your time to meditate, like brushing your teeth or taking a shower or drinking your morning cup of coffee. And then another approach too is just starting to pay attention to the times when you're having a strong reaction to something. Maybe it doesn't have to be when you're in this highest state of overwhelm, but when you're just having a strong reaction to something, can you notice and do a little bit of gentle inquiry? What is this about for me? Because we're going to have to retract the focus on blaming someone else or the world and just put that on pause for a second and look, what's going on for me right now? And don't make it about blaming yourself. It's not about that. It's not to say that other people aren't accountable for their actions. It's just to set that aside and not look at that right now and instead look at what's going on for me because I'm suffering and I care about that. And if there's anything that can be done to meet this moment of suffering, meet this suffering heart, then I want to know.
It feels like a perfect place to end. Actionable, wise. I love it. Cara, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, next we're bringing on Roy Baumeister, one of the most cited psychologists in the world. His work focuses on negativity bias and why, when everything around us is going pretty well, we tend to focus on that one negative thing and let it drive us completely bonkers. Well, Roy, it's great to have you here.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So, Roy, we're going to be talking about your work that looks at why, in a sea of good, we focus so much on the bad. And a lot of your work started in psychology, but there was some work in the financial realm. So tell us how you got on this path.
A variety of things made me just notice that there was a pattern in multiple places. In my own work, we had experiments where we manipulated success and failure to see how people respond to that, and there would be a neutral control. And the neutral control and the success condition had similar effects, but the failure condition was different. And then in another line of work, I was studying interpersonal acceptance versus rejection. And again, we'd have a neutral control, and the acceptance, which is a good thing, again, was pretty similar in its consequences to the neutral control, whereas the rejection really stood out. So I noticed it there. And other place psychologists had noticed it was in first impressions. When you meet somebody new, if you learn something bad about them, that has a bigger effect on your total impression than learning something good.
Yeah.
And this seems to hold up over the long term as well. So that made me think there may be a broader pattern here. And I started looking around for it, and got a couple colleagues and students to help comb the literature. We were looking for exceptions initially because I thought it would make an interesting theory to see where is this true and where is it false. We all had our own pet theories about what the exceptions would be. Like maybe bad things in the past have more influence, but in the future, it's the good things that you. But no, none of that held up. It was just seemed to be true everywhere that bad things had a higher impact. So this is not a major part of my research. It was kind of a spin-off and a side project, but it's become one of my most frequently discussed papers. Something like 12,000 other publications have mentioned that original paper.
Yeah, so the paper comes out in 2001.
Yes, I think that was right.
And it's titled "Bad is Stronger Than Good." And to your point, it's one of the most cited papers in the game. How do you explain the phenomenon to the average person? Someone says, okay, well, what did you find in the paper? What do you tell them?
Okay, so the basic idea is that the human mind reacts to bad things and to negative information more strongly than to parallel good things. So you mentioned the economists. What they'd found is people are more upset about losing $100 than they're happy about gaining $100.
Yeah.
And this actually will warp people's investment decisions and so on, because you need to take some risk to get larger rewards, but people are afraid of risk. I might lose my money.
Right.
And then we found it in one place after another. So I mentioned the first impressions thing, and that had been done all different ways. There's even some guy who had a very mathematical approach to interpersonal understanding. They had all the adjectives you could get, 500 of them to describe people, and had them rated for how favorable or unfavorable they were. So if you give somebody a list of 5 and say, okay, here's a person described by these 5 traits, what's your impression? So you would think the average of the favorability of each of those 5 traits would exactly dead on predict the global impression, right? Mm-hmm. When you add them up. But it never worked. The overall impression was more negative than the average of the 5 traits, which meant that the bad ones had a bigger impact on your total impression than the good ones.
Interesting. So if someone was looking at 5 descriptive words of a person, and 4 of them are seemingly somewhat positive, but then there's one that could be negative, they would have have a bad impression of the person, even though there's just one negative out of the 5.
Yes, well, I don't. Everything's on a continuum here. They're relating it, so you're rating your impression of the person on the same 5-point scale, perhaps. But again, it would be more negative. That one negative one, or if there are 2 negative ones, they have a stronger impact on the global impression.
Yeah. So, Roy, where else did you see this pop up?
Well, so some psychologists track how people feel. If you have a good day, you feel good. If you have a bad day, you feel bad. Mm-hmm. So that's not a surprise. But the good day wears off, and so the next day there's no lasting effect. Whereas a bad day will have a carryover effect and will have an impact on how happy you are the next day. Mm. Also, if they track the individual events, the bad events have a bigger impact totally than the good things. I mean, one of my favorite examples, if you go back in history, I think it was Ben Franklin who said, if mankind could only solve the problem of toothaches, everybody would just be happy forever. And you think of what it must have been like before modern dentistry, that you got a toothache and you just had pain in your jaw for a couple of weeks at a time. And so I could sympathize, but we hardly have toothaches anymore, and yet we're not all living in perpetual happiness and joy.
That's what's so interesting is that if you look at the grand sweep of time, I think we've never been more comfortable or safer than ever. And yet when you poll the average American, only 6% of people think that the world is improving. Do you think that your research explains why that trend is?
Well, that's one of the factors, yes, that people have more negative. It filters through the media, but it goes that if you want to sell books, say that there's a crisis. The book I wrote from this, which is much more recent, was with John Tierney. He's the first author, and he's just a wonderful writer. So I can say I'm not boasting about myself, but about my co-author. But he was a journalist, and he said, he learned early in his career, if you want to get on the front page, your story better be a crisis.
Yeah. If it bleeds, it leads, in other words.
Yeah. He said his first assignment was that there was a heat wave in the East, and so people were going to the beach, and there was a traffic jam. And so it was sent out to cover the traffic jam. And to get on the front page, it had to be, there's a crisis. Yeah, come on. A lot of people are going to the beach because it's hot.
Yeah.
But presenting it as a crisis. I mean, the environmental movement is another example. We've been predicting disasters one after another, and they still are. Most of them have not come true. Indeed, I started with, I think, that book Silent Spring back in the early 60s, saying pretty soon there aren't going to be any more birds. Well, we still got birds.
Yeah.
What is it, 80 years later? And we're going to run out of food, and we're going to run out of energy, or we're going to run out of this and that, and people will be starving, all these things. And that's what carries. So the media compete for attention by emphasizing bad things, and that's why people get the impression that everything is so awful when this is really the best time to be alive in the history of the world.
Where do you see this pop up in sort of everyday life for people? So an example that comes to mind at a personal level is if I go out to dinner and I order, say, a salad with no bacon, but I want no bacon. And everything about the dinner is perfect. Everything about the restaurant, the people I'm with, but then they bring it out and it has the bacon that I said don't put on there. All of a sudden that colors the night, and I have not as good of a night because of that. Is that like a good example of how this plays out in day-to-day life? It's like one little thing can go wrong in a sea of good, and all of a sudden that colors how I viewed that experience.
Yes, that would be a fine example. Because the mind attends to and overreacts to bad things, it won't notice all the good things. And maybe a dinner is not a big thing, but certainly in a relationship with another person, a few bad things will have a much bigger impact on the total relationship than the good ones.
Didn't you find that there needs to be some ratio of positive interactions to negative with couples? Wasn't it like you need 5 positive interactions for every negative, and then once it gets down to 1 to 1?
That's called the Gottman ratio. The Gottman ratio, named after John Gottman. I guess it first came up. He had a big longitudinal study to track couples over time and see who stayed together and who broke up. And he came to a conference and asked all the other relationships experts, well, what do you predict is the most powerful thing? And so they said, well, it's whether they like the same things or they're kind or how intelligent they are. But what won was the ratio of how often they had sex and how often they had an argument, a fight. And so Gottman pursued that, and he found if it's 5 to 1 or better, then the relationship's likely to succeed. And if it's less than that, then it's probably not. I mean, the beauty of it works for couples who might have an argument every week, but as long as they have sex 5 or 6 times every week, that is fine. And it works for couples who maybe have a fight once a year and don't have sex very much, but as long as it's more than 5, it seems to be there. Yeah, even with other things, we found the break-even point seems to be about 3 to 1 or 4 to 1. So if you want things to be good, you need to do a little bit better than that. So there's practical advice. I mean, sometimes you say, oh, I did something to upset my partner the other day, made her angry, bothered him or whatever. So I should do something nice for them to make it up. Well, no, you should do 4 or 5 nice things to make up for it.
Over-index. 4x that nice thing you had in mind. One other thing that I thought was interesting is that you've pointed out that one criticism can drown out a sea of compliments. Is there a ratio there?
Well, it's probably around the same, although there's some cases in which compliments don't have, if you live in a world where lots of people are giving compliments all the time, then the single negative thing will stand out even much more significantly. My dissertation advisor, his educational philosophy, I think, was as if the criticism is careful and thorough enough, you didn't have to bother with praise. So I think I remember all 4 positive things he ever said to me. So those stood out because they were rare. But other people are throwing out compliments all the time. Those compliments don't mean nearly as much.
Yeah. That's interesting. I experienced this myself. I was on a handful of years ago, I was on this big podcast called the Joe Rogan podcast. And once I go on, afterwards, he looks at me and he says, don't read the comments, all right? So naturally, I read the comments on the YouTube, and there's, more than 100 comments. 99% of them are good. I can't remember any of those 99%, but what I can remember are the 3 that were negative. I just go, oh my gosh.
Yes.
Now, I will say the thing that helped me is kind of pulling back and going, hey, you know what? Those are kind of funny. So what have you learned about how to give criticism to people and also how people can take criticism?
Yeah. Well, taking it, my wife and I are both professors. It's the same thing at the end of the semester. You get the student comments, and they're nearly all positive, but you remember the few negative ones. What we started doing was we would read through each other's, because what you want to do, you don't want to be upset by someone who said, oh, I didn't like your socks one day or something like that. But what you want to do is there any useful feedback for how you can do a better job the next time? So we would each read through them and come through and then say, okay, well, this would be the interesting constructive suggestion. So you can get around that way. Tierney looked into this, the feedback aspect too, as did I in terms of research. People are reluctant to give bad news. So when the boss calls you in for your annual review, he'll start or she'll start with the positive things because they want to put off the bad. But the thing is, the person listening knows there's something bad coming. So almost all the people say, give me the bad news first. Mm-hmm. And so then you get that over with and you see, well, it's not that bad. 1 or 2 things to work on. And then you're ready to hear some good news. But when they start with the good news, it's yeah. Come on, get to the real stuff. Yeah. So that's advice for supervisors and advisors and others and so on. Start with the negative, and then move on to the good stuff, and then you can sort of end on a positive note.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the advice you see is start with the positive, weave in the negative, and then end on the positive. But instead, it's just get over the negative first and then say, but, and then start to highlight the positive. That way the person just kind of goes, okay, and they're done with it. Yeah. And then they can maybe better listen to and accept the positive.
Right, yeah.
That makes sense. So, question I have, big picture question. Why are we like this? Why do we focus so much on the negative?
Well, that was one of the driving questions. That's when I said, let's see where it's true and where it's not true. And then what it's true about, that we can study the features of that, and that will tell us what it's for. Somewhat to our disappointment, we didn't find any exceptions. So it didn't make that sort of interesting, complicated theory. But in a way, that was offset by, well, this must be one of the basic properties of the mind, and something that basic. And there's even some evidence that animals have the same reaction, that they react to punishment more than reward. There's some interesting studies with how hard a mouse or a lab rat, say, will pull either to get away from something bad or to move towards something good, and so forth. And again, the bad seems to be stronger even there. So it made me think it's just part of how we evolved. And evolution is there to prolong life, to survive or reproduce. So I just like to say, life has to win every day. Death only has to win once. So you want to be really alert to any possibility of death. If there's some food that, might be good, but it might poison you, well, if you don't eat it, maybe you missed out on some food, but that's not the worst thing. But if you make the other mistake and you eat it and it's poisonous, that's really bad. Yeah. Indeed, the digestive system is a very strong indicator of this effect. Use the example, say you never had fish until you were 17 years old, and then you had 4 meals with fish, and 2 of them were wonderful and delicious, sublime, and 2 of them just made you sick and puking your guts out. So too good, too bad. What do you think? Is that an even trade? No. You'll probably never eat fish again.
Right.
After that.
Yeah. And then just from the evolutionary arguments about where we're going to put our attention, if you were the person, 250,000 years ago, who's standing in the field going, oh, look at those beautiful wildflowers. Aren't those today's a wonderful day. Meanwhile, there's a tiger creeping up, and you're not focusing on what could possibly go wrong and the bads in that situation, you're probably not going to survive. Meanwhile, the guy who's going, the flowers, I don't care about that. Something could kill me at any moment. So I'm going to be scanning the horizon looking for creeping death, more or less. And then those genes get passed on. And now here we are, or here I am at the restaurant going, I can't believe they put bacon on my salad. So I have one question that I was a bit... I want you to walk me through this because I was trying to square it. So I live in Las Vegas, and this is a town built on gambling. Now, everyone knows the house always wins in the long run, and the longer you gamble, the more you're going to lose. And yet people keep coming back to play despite that loss and that negative impact. So how do you square that?
There's some people who've researched it. Tom Gilovich at Cornell is a great psychology professor. He said, what people do is they remember some of their losses as near wins. So if they're betting on a sports game and their team is winning, and then right at the end they give up a touchdown or a home run or something, and they lose, they don't put that in their memory as, I lost, I shouldn't bet. But they said, oh, no, I was right. It was just that one freak play or a mistake by the referee or something like that. So they record them as near wins and don't count it. So they kind of bias their memory in favor of the positive ones.
That's interesting.
That seems to be a deliberate memory bias to suppress the negative. And sustain the gambling, which I guess people find to be fun. Obviously, they do.
It's interesting that you bring up the near wins. So that makes me think of a lot of slot machines. They have this feature called losses disguised as wins, and it's basically if I bet $1, I might quote unquote win 50 cents. So my dollar bet, I get 50 cents. It goes, and the machine bings. I go, oh my, congratulations, you won 50 cents on your $1. So really you're losing 50 cents, but the machine is behaving as if you have actually won and you're out ahead. And so I think that could maybe bias us.
Yes, that would play into that. I didn't know they did that, but again, I don't gamble. But it sounds like somebody in the gambling industry realized maybe they read Gilovich's paper and they say, well, how can we make people remember their losses or some of their losses as near wins?
Yeah. A lot of my work looks at how doing things that are inherently challenging, although they can be somewhat aversive in the short term, can help improve our lives in the long run. How do you think that squares with your work, if at all?
We find, generally another point we made in the original article and in the book as well, is psychology has a concept of trauma, which is a single bad event that has a lasting effect on you. And there's no real opposite concept to that. A single good event does not really produce a lasting good. It reminds me of Woody Allen's old joke that, well, if God exists, he's an underachiever. That it would have been nice if he designed us differently so that the good things had a lasting effect and the bad things wore off faster. But we were designed by evolution, which meant you should learn from mistakes and learn not to repeat them. If you do something that produces a negative effect, stay away from that. And trauma would be an extreme case of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for people who feel like things are persistently bad in their life, they're overwhelmed, what do you tell them? Like your students?
Well, so there are two pathways into that comment. One is you are having a horrible year and, your dog died and your boyfriend or girlfriend dumped you and you lost a lot of money. Okay, well, you have to ride those out. It's still probably better than what life was like a couple hundred years ago. Probably more common, though, is that people get bogged down with small things and upset about small things and don't appreciate how lucky it is to live in the Western civilization at this point in history. So stepping back and taking the big picture and, okay, so something bad happened, but still look at all the good things in your life. And you can do things to cultivate positive feelings too. We talked earlier about the news focusing on bad things, but you can go around and look for positive things to make you feel good. There's some great humor sites online. You can go and read those or sign up for a cartoon service to send you a cartoon every day. Many of those will sort of bring a smile.
What else do you do that you think helps your outlook every day to not focus on negative?
I try to have some bliss every day, do something to feel good. Living here up in the mountains, so it's nice to go out for a walk. One thing that has emerged from the positive psychology research is just exposure to the beauties of nature. That's a very positive thing. So injecting some positive feelings into your life.
Well, this conversation has made me have a more positive outlook. And I appreciate you taking the time chatting with us, Roy.
Okay, my pleasure too. And yes, the world is really a lot better than what you'd think perusing the online stuff.
All right, let's land the plane on this episode. So both Cara and Roy, they talked about how media and its constant negativity really biases our perception of reality into the negative. There's a study about this. It is one of the most insane studies I've ever come across, and it's really changed my thinking about media and how much time I'm going to spend on it and how it's going to affect me. So here's how it went. Immediately after the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, researchers from UC Irvine, they studied two groups. Now, the first group, these were people who binged watched news about the bombing for at least 6 hours a day. So bombing happens, they immediately turn on CNN or Fox, and they just start binge watching bombing coverage. The second group, these were people who were actually at the Boston Marathon. They were either running in it or they were watching it. The bomb went off right at the race where they were at. And the researchers found that the people who watched the news weren't actually at the bombing, but they just watched the news. They had higher rates of PTSD and they had higher rates of trauma compared to the people who were actually at the bombing. That is insane. That is absolutely insane. And what does it tell us? It tells us maybe don't spend so much time taking in negative news. It actually affects us. So with all that said, thanks for listening to the episode. We are in your feeds twice a week, so please keep an eye out for more. As always, do not forget to hit subscribe. That is super helpful for us. And if you want to check out the show on the new iHeart app, video will be streaming there, so do give it a download. And we're always open to your questions for our Ask Michael Anything section. Send them to media@twopct.com or drop them in the comments. We'll try and answer as many of your questions as we can. And as always, have fun, don't die, and maybe don't watch so much news.